The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in a glass conference room while my manager, Eric Dalton, proudly led a call with our company's biggest client, North Star Retail. He was smiling like always, acting confident, acting like everything was under control. But I already knew something was wrong. The shipment tracking system I had warned him about for months had started failing overnight. Hundreds of shipments were showing blank tracking numbers. Inventory records were vanishing. I had warned Eric about this exact scenario multiple times. He ignored every single message. Then the client's voice cut through the call. "Eric, can you explain something?" The tone was calm, but something about it made the room freeze. "We're looking at emails from your operations coordinator, Emily Carter," the client said. "She warned you about this failure 2 months ago. Why wasn't it fixed?" My stomach dropped. Eric's head slowly turned toward me. His confident smile disappeared. The conference room went completely silent. For the first time since he became my boss, Eric Dalton looked nervous. But that moment was only the beginning. Because to understand how everything fell apart that morning, you have to go back 3 months, to the day Eric Dalton became my manager. When Eric Dalton first arrived, everyone thought we had hit the jackpot. He was charismatic, confident, and knew exactly how to impress upper leadership. He came from a large consulting firm and loved talking about big-picture strategy. Our department handled logistics operations, tracking shipments, solving delivery issues, and keeping client inventory accurate. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept the company alive. Eric didn't care much about details. He cared about presentations. During his first team meeting, he told us something that sounded harmless at the time. "I don't want people bringing me problems," he said with a grin. "Bring me solutions." Everyone nodded, but what he really meant was something different. Eric didn't like hearing bad news, especially if it made him look unprepared. At first, I tried to help him succeed. I sent him summaries of system issues, weekly reports, and risk alerts. My job as operations coordinator was to catch problems early. For a few weeks, he barely responded. Then one day, during a team meeting, Eric presented a new process improvement plan. It sounded familiar, very familiar, because it was my report, my ideas, my recommendations. He didn't mention my name once. That was the first moment I realized something about Eric Dalton. He didn't just ignore warnings. He used them when they benefited him. And that behavior would soon get much worse. 2 months later, I noticed something strange in our tracking system. It started small. A few shipment records were failing to sync between the warehouse database and the client dashboard. At first, it looked like a minor glitch. But when I ran a deeper check, I found something much worse. The sync failures were stacking up. If the system kept failing at this rate, the database would eventually overwrite shipment IDs. That meant products could disappear from the tracking system completely. For a company like North Star Retail, that would be catastrophic. They launched hundreds of products every week. I immediately wrote a detailed report. Screenshots. Logs. Risk analysis. Then I emailed Eric. Subject line: urgent system risk. Requires immediate fix. I expected him to respond within the hour. He didn't. 2 days later, I walked into his office. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Emily," he said casually, "you worry too much." I tried to explain the risk. He waved his hand dismissively. "Engineering said the system is stable." "But they didn't run the full data sync test," I said. Eric leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Let's not create problems that don't exist." Then he added something that stayed with me. "Focus on your tasks. Leave strategy to management." I walked out of his office feeling small. But the data didn't lie. And the failures were getting worse. The next escalation happened during a team operations meeting. Our department gathered every Monday to review system performance. When the tracking report appeared on the screen, I noticed several new sync failures. The numbers had doubled. My heart started racing. I raised my hand. "Eric, the shipment sync issue is getting worse. If we don't patch the API." Eric interrupted me mid-sentence. "Emily." His voice had that polite smile tone. "Let's not alarm everyone." The room went quiet. "But the logs show." Engineering already confirmed the system is stable, he said firmly. That wasn't true. They had never reviewed the data I sent. Eric continued talking to the team. Sometimes junior staff misinterpret technical reports. Several coworkers looked down at their laptops. My face burned. I felt humiliated. Eric moved on like nothing happened. But that moment did something important. It changed how I handled everything going forward. If my warnings weren't going to be taken seriously, I would make sure they were documented. Every email, every report, every ignored message. I didn't know it yet, but that habit would soon become the most important decision of my career. 2 weeks later, Eric called a leadership strategy meeting. The directors were attending. Even the VP of Operations, Brian Hensley, was there. I wasn't invited, but I happened to walk past the conference room while the meeting was happening. That's when I heard something that made my stomach drop. Eric was presenting a new risk monitoring framework. The slides looked familiar, because they were mine, word for word. The same report I had emailed him weeks earlier. But now Eric was presenting it like it was his idea. Leadership seemed impressed. Brian Hensley nodded while Eric explained how he had identified potential tracking vulnerabilities. I stood frozen outside the room. Eric had ignored my warnings publicly, but privately, he was using them to make himself look brilliant. That moment changed something inside me. I stopped trying to win his approval. Instead, I started protecting myself. I organized every email thread, saved every report, backed up every message. Then I noticed something strange. Someone from internal compliance had accessed the shipment system logs. No one mentioned it. No one explained it. But it meant something important. Someone inside the company was quietly watching the system. And Eric had no idea. A week later, I received a strange email. It came from someone in internal audit. Rachel and Gwen. The message was short. Hi Emily, quick question about shipment sync logs. Could you send me your recent reports? My heart skipped. Internal audit almost never contacted operations staff directly. I forwarded everything. The warnings, the data logs, the risk analysis. Rachel replied within minutes. Thank you. This is very helpful. That was it. No explanation. But something about the tone made me uneasy. That same week, Eric called another team meeting. He looked unusually confident. I've been discussing system optimization with leadership, he said proudly. Then he announced something shocking. Our department is being considered for a major expansion. Everyone clapped. But my stomach tightened, because the system failures were getting worse. Much worse. And Eric still hadn't approved the fix. After the meeting, my coworker Jason Miller pulled me aside. Hey, he whispered. You were right about the sync errors. I just saw them in the warehouse logs. That was the first time someone else confirmed it. But the real danger was still ahead. Because the client was about to launch their biggest product of the year. And the system was not ready. North Star Retail was preparing for a massive product launch. Thousands of shipments would move through our system in a single week. The pressure across the company was intense. Everyone was focused on speed, which made the tracking issue even more dangerous. One night, I ran a stress simulation on the system. The results were terrifying. Under heavy traffic, the shipment database would start overwriting records. Products would appear delivered when they weren't. Others would disappear completely. I wrote another report. This one was even more urgent. I walked directly into Eric's office. You need to approve the system patch before the launch, I said. He barely looked up. Emily, we've already discussed this. If the system fails during launch. He closed his laptop loudly. Stop exaggerating. Then he leaned forward and said something that explained everything. Leadership is reviewing our department for promotion opportunities. His eyes narrowed. I'm not presenting them with imaginary problems right now. That was the truth. Eric wasn't ignoring the warnings because he thought they were wrong. He ignored them because fixing the issue would expose that he missed it earlier. And his career mattered more than the risk. But he didn't realize one thing. The system was already breaking. The first major failure happened at 2:14 a.m. I was checking overnight system alerts when my dashboard exploded with warnings. Shipment records were duplicating. Tracking numbers were disappearing. Hundreds of entries were suddenly marked error. My heart started pounding. The system had reached the breaking point. I immediately emailed Eric. No response. I called him. Straight to voicemail. Then I did the only thing I could. I documented everything. Logs. Screenshots. Error reports. By morning, the system had stabilized again. But the damage was clear. Dozens of shipments had corrupted data. When Eric arrived at the office, I rushed to his desk. The system failed last night. He skimmed the report for 10 seconds. Then he shrugged. Looks like a temporary glitch. It's the exact failure pattern I warned about. Eric sighed like I was annoying him. Emily, relax. Then he said something that stunned me. Don't escalate this. It'll make the department look bad. That was the moment I realized something. Eric wasn't just ignoring the problem. He was actively hiding it. But someone else had already seen the logs. And they weren't going to stay quiet much longer. 2 days later, Rachel from internal audit emailed again. This time her message was different. Emily, can we schedule a quick call? My pulse quickened. During the call, she asked very specific questions. When did I first report the issue? Who did I send the warnings to? Were there responses? I answered honestly. Then she said something strange. Thank you for documenting everything. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? I asked. Rachel paused. I can't discuss ongoing reviews. Then she added quietly. But your reports were important. After the call ended, I stared at my screen. Ongoing reviews? What did that mean? That afternoon, Eric walked through the office, looking unusually confident again. He had just come from a leadership meeting. Big things coming for our department, he told everyone. I forced a smile, because I knew something he didn't. Internal audit had my warnings. Every single one. But the real explosion hadn't happened yet. Because North Star's product launch started in 3 days. And the system was hanging by a thread. 2 days before launch, the client sent an email. Their system had flagged several missing shipments. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was close. Eric forwarded the message to the team. Let's keep an eye on this, he wrote casually. No urgency. No action. I replied with my full report again. Eric ignored it. Instead, he scheduled a call with the client and told them the issue was minor. After the meeting, he walked past my desk. You need to stop sending these dramatic reports, he said quietly. They're accurate, I replied. Eric smirked. Perception matters more than panic. That sentence explained everything. He cared about appearances, not outcomes. But something interesting happened that afternoon. Jason from the warehouse sent me a message. Emily, the sync errors are spreading. More systems were failing. More shipments were disappearing. And now the client was starting to notice. I stared at my monitor, realizing the launch would push the system past its limit. The collapse wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a countdown, and we were almost out of time. Launch day arrived. Within hours, shipment traffic exploded. The system slowed immediately. Then the alerts began. Hundreds, then thousands. Tracking IDs were overriding each other. Shipment histories were vanishing. My screen filled with red error warnings. The nightmare scenario had started. Jason rushed over to my desk. Emily, we're losing records. I immediately sent Eric a message. System failure confirmed. We need emergency patch approval now. He didn't reply. Instead, a company-wide email appeared from Eric. Team, small tracking delays during launch. Everything under control. My jaw dropped. He was still pretending the problem didn't exist. But outside the office, the client's warehouse teams were already noticing the chaos. Products couldn't be located. Delivery confirmations were wrong. Customer complaints started flooding their support lines. Then my phone buzzed. An email from North Star's operations director. It contained something shocking. A forwarded message chain. My original warning report. And one question. Why was this ignored? I felt a chill run through my body. Because the next email went somewhere else. Straight to Eric Dalton. That's how we ended up back in the conference room. Eric was leading the client call like everything was fine. until the client mentioned my warning emails. I watched Eric's confidence crumble. He tried to recover quickly. "We're currently reviewing the system data," he said smoothly. But the client wasn't finished. "Your employee predicted this exact failure," the client said. Their voice turned sharper. "We want to know why it wasn't addressed." Eric glanced at me again. For the first time since he became my boss. He looked scared. The call ended with one demand. Northstar wanted a full explanation. Immediately, Eric walked out of the conference room in silence. Then he turned to me. "Come to my office." My heart pounded as I followed him. The moment the door closed, his calm mask disappeared. "Why did you send those emails to the client?" "I didn't," I said honestly. His face went pale. That meant the client had received them some other way. And there was only one group inside the company who had them. Internal audit. But Eric didn't know that yet. And the real investigation was only beginning. For the first time since he joined the company, Eric Dalton looked completely rattled. He paced around his office while rereading the client's email. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered. "It's not," I said quietly. He glared at me. "You should have brought these concerns to me earlier." I almost laughed. I did. Multiple times. Eric ignored that. Instead, he started typing rapid messages to leadership. Damage control had begun. An emergency meeting was scheduled for the next morning with the VP. But something unexpected happened that evening. Rachel from Internal Audit sent me another email.
Short. Direct.
"Emily, please do not alter or delete any documentation related to the shipment system." My hands went cold. That message meant one thing. A formal investigation had started. And Eric had no idea. Meanwhile, the system failure kept spreading. More shipments disappeared. More clients complained. The company was entering crisis mode. Everyone thought the story was about a technical failure. But it wasn't. It was about decisions. Ignored warnings. And a manager who had spent months protecting his reputation. Now the truth was getting closer to the surface. And when it finally came out, Eric Dalton's career would never recover. The next morning, the entire operations leadership team was called into an emergency meeting. The mood inside the conference room felt heavy. No one was smiling. The VP of Operations, Brian Hensley, sat at the head of the table with a stack of printed reports. Eric sat beside him, unusually quiet. I had never been invited to a meeting like this before. Brian began calmly. "Northstar Retail lost visibility on nearly 400 shipments yesterday." Everyone shifted in their seats. "That's unacceptable." Then Brian slid a printed email across the table. It was my warning report, the exact one I had sent Eric 2 months earlier. "Emily Carter identified this risk in advance," Brian said. Eric quickly leaned forward. "Yes, and we've been evaluating the situation internally." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. Brian frowned. "Evaluating?" Eric nodded. "We were planning to address it after the launch window." My heart pounded. That wasn't true. Then Eric did something I never expected. He looked directly at me. "Emily, didn't we discuss delaying the patch due to engineering capacity?" The room turned toward me. I realized what he was doing. He was trying to pull me into the blame. But before I could answer, Brian raised his hand. "Let's pause." Then he said something that made Eric's face go pale. "Internal Audit is joining us in 15 minutes. When Rachel Nguyen from Internal Audit entered the room, the atmosphere changed instantly. She carried a laptop and a thick binder of printed documents. Brian gestured toward her. "Rachel has been reviewing the system logs." Rachel nodded politely, then opened the binder. 3 months ago, she said, Emily Carter submitted a risk report regarding shipment synchronization failures. She projected the email on the screen.
Date. Time.
Attachments. Everything was there. Then Rachel clicked to the next slide. It showed the email thread. "My warning." Eric's reply. 1 sentence. "No action required." The room fell silent. Eric shifted in his chair. Rachel continued. "Over the following 6 weeks, Emily submitted 5 additional reports." She clicked again. Each warning appeared on the screen. Each ignored. Then came the twist. Rachel revealed system access logs. They show Eric Dalton access these reports before presenting a risk monitoring framework to leadership. Brian frowned. Are you saying the reports were used in presentations? Rachel nodded. Yes. Everyone slowly turned toward Eric, because that meant something very clear. He had used my warnings to impress leadership while ignoring the problem itself. Eric opened his mouth to respond. But before he could, Brian asked one quiet question. Eric, why didn't you approve the fix? Eric hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. Eric finally spoke. At the time, I believed the risk was exaggerated. But Rachel immediately responded. The logs show the failure pattern increasing weekly. Eric swallowed. Then his voice tightened. Engineering resources were limited. That wasn't the real reason. And everyone knew it. Brian leaned forward. Eric, you're not answering the question. The room went still. Eric finally exhaled. I had just taken over the department, he admitted. There was pressure to stabilize performance metrics. Now the truth was starting to surface. Eric had joined during a difficult quarter. Leadership expected quick improvements. Problems would make him look weak. Rachel clicked another slide. It showed a promotion review scheduled for Eric. 2 weeks after my first warning. Brian stared at it. So, you didn't escalate the issue because it would hurt your promotion? Eric didn't answer. But his silence confirmed it. He had gambled with the system because he didn't want leadership to know there was a problem under his watch. And now the consequences were unfolding. But the biggest twist hadn't happened yet. Because at that exact moment, Brian's assistant entered the room. There's someone from North Star Retail on the phone. The client wanted to speak directly to leadership. And what they said next changed everything. The phone was placed on speaker. A calm voice introduced himself. Michael Reeves, Operations Director for North Star Retail. Brian greeted him professionally. Michael, we're reviewing the situation now. Michael responded immediately. We appreciate that. Then he said something unexpected. I want to clarify something regarding Emily Carter. Everyone looked at me. Michael continued. She contacted our support team 2 months ago. My heart skipped. That was true. I had sent them a technical alert when I first saw the risk. Michael continued. She warned us that a sync issue might appear during high traffic. The room grew quiet. Then Michael said the sentence that completely changed the tone. We trust Emily's work. Eric's head snapped toward me. Michael continued calmly. She was the only person who flagged this risk early. That loyalty stunned everyone. Then Michael added something even more shocking. We recommended the fix to your management team after reviewing her report. Brian slowly turned toward Eric. You received a recommendation from the client. Eric said nothing, because the truth was obvious. He ignored both internal warnings and the client's advice. And now the company's biggest customer was watching the investigation unfold. But Eric wasn't finished fighting, because the next move he made would be desperate and dangerous. That afternoon, Eric requested a private meeting with leadership. But when I walked into the room, I realized I had been included too. Brian sat quietly while Eric stood beside a presentation screen. I want to clarify something, Eric began. He pulled up a chart. It showed the timeline of system warnings. Then he pointed to one section. These reports were compiled by Emily. My stomach tightened. Eric continued. She is responsible for system monitoring. The implication was obvious. He was suggesting the issue existed because my monitoring didn't escalate correctly. Brian's expression hardened. Are you blaming Emily for the system failure? Eric hesitated. I'm saying there may have been communication gaps. Rachel spoke before anyone else could. That's not accurate. She opened her laptop. Then she displayed something devastating. An internal message Eric had sent weeks earlier.
It read,
Stop escalating the sync issue. It will create unnecessary noise. The room fell silent again. Eric stared at the screen. Rachel closed the laptop. That message was sent to Emily Carter. Eric's attempt to shift blame had just collapsed instantly. And Brian looked furious. But Eric still didn't realize how deep the problem went. Because the audit team had uncovered something even worse. Rachel returned the next day with another report. This one had nothing to do with the shipment failure. At least not directly. She displayed several leadership presentations Eric had delivered over the past 3 months. Brian frowned. What are we looking at? Rachel zoomed into the documents. These improvement proposals. The slides contained ideas, process fixes, risk analysis, monitoring frameworks, all things Eric had presented proudly. Then Rachel pulled up the original documents. My reports, Jason's warehouse notes, other staff suggestions. Every innovation Eric had claimed credit for had actually come from someone on the team. He had built his reputation by quietly collecting employee work and presenting it as his own. Brian leaned back in his chair. Eric, his voice sounded colder than I had ever heard it. You've been claiming credit for your team's work. Eric tried to speak, but nothing came out, because the evidence was overwhelming. Rachel closed the presentation. There's one final review scheduled tomorrow. Brian nodded slowly.
Good.
Then he looked directly at Eric. Because this situation is bigger than a system failure. It was now about trust, leadership integrity, and a pattern of deception. Eric Dalton's career was hanging by a thread, but the most dramatic moment was still ahead. While leadership investigated Eric, the system crisis was still ongoing. The engineering team finally deployed the fix I had recommended months ago. Within hours, the shipment database stabilized. Tracking records began syncing again, but the damage had already been done. North Star had lost visibility on hundreds of shipments during launch week. Customer complaints flooded their support teams. Brian personally called Michael Reeves to apologize. But something surprising happened during that call. Michael remained calm. We understand technical failures, he said. Then he added something meaningful. What matters is accountability. He paused. And Emily Carter showed that. That statement traveled quickly through the company. Suddenly people started approaching my desk. Coworkers, warehouse staff, even engineers. Many of them said the same thing. You tried to warn them. For months, I had felt invisible. Now the truth was spreading. But Eric was growing more desperate. Because the next day was the final leadership review. And he knew exactly what it could mean. The end of everything he had been building. The final leadership meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Executives from several departments attended. This wasn't just a routine review anymore. It was an accountability meeting. Eric sat quietly while Rachel summarized the audit findings. Ignored warnings. Client recommendations dismissed. Credit taken from employees. Brian finally turned toward Eric. Do you have anything to say? Eric looked exhausted. For the first time since he arrived at the company, he dropped the confident act. I made mistakes, he admitted. The room remained silent. Eric continued. I was under pressure to prove I could lead this department. He looked down at the table. When Emily first reported the issue, I thought fixing it would make me look like I had missed something. That was the real reason.
Fear.
Fear of looking incompetent. Fear of losing a promotion. Fear of losing status. So he chose to ignore the warning. And then he doubled down. Brian listened quietly. Then he said something simple. Leadership isn't about hiding problems. Eric didn't respond, because he already understood what was coming. But there was one final twist waiting in that room, and it would determine exactly how the story ended. Halfway through the meeting, Brian's phone rang again. It was North Star. He answered on speaker. Michael Reeves spoke calmly. We've completed our internal review. Everyone leaned forward. Our company values partners who communicate honestly. Brian nodded. We understand. Michael continued. Emily Carter demonstrated that. Then came the twist no one expected. North Star would like Emily to lead future operations coordination for our account. My heart stopped. That meant direct collaboration with their leadership team. Brian smiled slightly. That sounds reasonable. Then Michael added one final statement. We trust people who warn us about problems, not people who hide them. The message was clear. Eric stared at the table. His reputation with the company's biggest client was gone. The meeting ended shortly after. But Eric stayed behind while everyone else left. And for the first time, he approached my desk. Not as a manager, but as someone who had lost everything. That evening, Eric stopped me near the elevators. He looked different. Tired. Defeated. "Emily, can we talk?" I hesitated but nodded.
He sighed.
I never meant for things to go this far. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I thought if I could fix the problem quietly later, no one would know. That was the gamble he made. Ignore the warning. Protect his reputation. Fix it later. But problems ignored rarely stay quiet. Eric looked at me. "They're considering terminating me." I didn't respond. Then he said something unexpected. "Could you tell them I tried to address the issue?" I stared at him. After months of ignoring me, dismissing me, and trying to blame me, he wanted my help. I shook my head gently. I already told them the truth. Eric closed his eyes, because that was the one thing he could no longer escape. The truth. And the truth had consequences. But the final outcome would come the next morning. The company announced the decision the next day. Eric Dalton was officially removed from his position. The statement cited leadership failures and accountability concerns. Brian held a team meeting shortly afterward.
He spoke calmly.
This situation taught us something important. He looked around the room. Warnings are not complaints. They are opportunities to fix problems early. Then he turned toward me. "Emily Carter demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we value." He announced that I would be promoted to Senior Operations Coordinator and lead the North Star account. The room erupted in applause. Jason slapped my shoulder. "You earned that." But the most powerful moment came later. As Eric packed his desk quietly, no one mocked him. No one celebrated his downfall, because everyone understood something deeper. His career didn't end because of a mistake. It ended because he chose pride over honesty. And leadership without honesty always collapses eventually. 3 months later, the North Star account was running smoother than ever. The system upgrades we implemented prevented future sync failures. And something else changed inside the company too. Leadership created a new policy. Every employee could report operational risks directly to compliance if needed. Because one ignored warning had nearly cost the company its biggest client. Sometimes I think about Eric. Not with anger, but with perspective. His downfall wasn't caused by one decision. It was caused by a pattern. Ignoring people. Protecting ego. Choosing appearances over truth. Eric Dalton lost his career because he believed perception mattered more than honesty. He believed hiding problems made him look strong. But real leadership is the opposite. It means facing problems early. Listening to the people who see them first. And having the courage to fix them before they explode. That experience changed how I view work forever. The biggest lesson I learned from the whole experience was simple. The truth might be ignored for a while, but eventually it speaks for itself. And when it does, the people who tried to bury it are the ones left explaining why. The person who warns you about a problem is not your enemy. They're the one trying to save you. And if you ignore them long enough, eventually the truth will show up anyway. Usually when it's too late. That's why in every meeting I lead now, I always say one thing first. If you see a risk, speak up. I always create a relaxed atmosphere for everyone to express themselves. Because the most dangerous workplace isn't the one with problems. It's the one where people are too afraid to report them. Share your experience in the comment section if you have experienced something like this.